What houses cost in the UK in 1965 will absolutely shock you when you realise your parents or grandparents could buy an entire family home for less than today's deposit. Picture this: a 3-bedroom, semi-detached house in a decent area for £3,500. That's not even a used car in London now. But here's where it gets truly mind-blowing. The generation who bought these properties didn't just get lucky, they accidentally stumbled into the greatest wealth creation machine in British history, turning modest savings into million-pound portfolios without lifting a finger. Right, let's dive straight into the numbers that'll make you either laugh or cry depending on whether you own property or not. In 1965, the average house price across the entire United Kingdom sat at £3,500. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like pocket change, and you're absolutely right. To put this in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to £62,000 in today's money when adjusted for inflation using the Bank of England's calculator. Except here's the kicker. The average house price today is actually around £285,000, which means property has outpaced general inflation by an astronomical margin. The really fascinating part is that nobody at the time thought they were getting a bargain. People in 1965 were genuinely worried about affordability, taking out mortgages at interest rates hovering between 6% and 7%. Actually not that different from today's rates after our recent spike. Young couples were stretching themselves financially, and the newspapers were full of concerned articles about rising prices. The average male wage was about £1,100 annually, with women earning roughly half that when they were allowed to work in comparable roles. But wait, there's something coming up that'll blow your mind about regional differences. Some areas were practically giving houses away compared to others, and if you chose wisely back then, you'd be sitting on an absolute gold mine today. Keep watching, because what I'm about to reveal about Scotland versus London prices will leave you speechless. Now, this is where things get properly interesting and, frankly, a bit controversial. London in 1965 wasn't quite the property powerhouse you might expect. The average house price in Greater London ranged from £4,000 to £5,000, certainly higher than the national average, but only by about 30 to 40%, not the 100% plus premium we see today. Compare that to Glasgow, where you could snap up a decent tenement flat for £1,500, or Newcastle, where £2,000 would get you a solid Tyneside flat with original Victorian features. The South East was already showing signs of becoming pricey, with Surrey and Kent commanding prices around £5,500 to £6,500 for better properties, particularly those within commuting distance of London. But here's the surprising bit. Manchester, which today is one of the UK's property investment hotspots, had average prices of just £2,400. Liverpool was even more affordable at around £1,800. These northern industrial powerhouses were struggling with industrial decline, making them unfashionable despite their stunning Victorian architecture. Wales presents a fascinating case study, with average prices around £2,200, though this masks huge variation. Cardiff was already relatively expensive at £3,000, while the Valley saw prices as low as £800 for a terraced house. The collapse of coal mining had devastated property values, yet these communities had incredible solidarity and character that money couldn't buy. Now, what about further beyond the northern border? Scotland's story is particularly intriguing. Edinburgh, with its Georgian elegance, commanded around £3,500, whilst Aberdeen, not yet transformed by North Sea oil that wouldn't happen until the 1970s, offered granite townhouses for £2,500. The Highlands were almost giving property away. You could acquire a croft with several acres for under £1,000, though you'd need to be hardy enough to cope with basic amenities and isolation. The Midlands occupied middle ground in every sense. Birmingham averaged £2,800, while smaller cities like Coventry and Leicester hovered around £2,500. These cities were still thriving with manufacturing, particularly the car industry, which made them solid Sensible choices rather than the spectacular bargains or expensive gambles found elsewhere. Here's where we need to properly examine what your money actually bought in 1965, because the specifications would make modern buyers weep with envy. A typical 3-bedroom semi-detached house, that backbone of British suburbia, would set you back £3,200 to £4,200 depending on location. But these weren't the cramped modern equivalents. We're talking 1,100 to 1,400 square feet with separate reception rooms, proper hallways and gardens where you could genuinely grow vegetables or keep chickens. 2-bedroom terraced houses, the starter homes of their era, ranged from £1,500 to £2,800. The variation depended enormously on age and location. A Victorian terrace in London might cost £2,800, while an identical property in Burnley would be £1,500. These Victorian and Edwardian properties featured ceiling heights of 10 to 12 feet, original fireplaces in every room, and solid walls built from proper brick, not the modern cavity construction that needs constant maintenance. For those with deeper pockets, a 4-bedroom detached house commanded £5,500 to £8,000. These were substantial properties, often Victorian or Edwardian villas, with 2,000 plus square feet, multiple reception rooms, and frequently a quarter-acre plot. In the stockbroker belt of Surrey, you might pay £10,000 for something truly special, perhaps with a tennis court or paddock. Don't fancy the apples and pears? Bungalows were experiencing their first major boom, particularly among retirees from the war generation who'd had enough of maintaining large houses. A new-build 2-bedroom bungalow cost around £4,000, premium pricing that reflected their modern conveniences like central heating, still rare in 1965, and fitted kitchens. Developers like Wimpey and Lying were mass-producing these in coastal areas and suburban developments. Now here's something that'll make you properly envious. Before I reveal the bizarre buying process that would seem like another world today, let me tell you about the flat market. Purpose-built flats were relatively uncommon outside London and major Scottish cities. In London, a 1-bedroom flat in a mansion block might cost £3,000, while the same money would buy you a 3-bedroom house in Birmingham. The concept of city centre living hadn't yet taken hold. That was still decades away. Right, buckle up for this, because the house buying process in 1965 operated on completely different principles from today. First off, forget digital anything. You found houses through classified ads in local newspapers, estate agent windows, they closed at 5 p.m. sharp, and all day Sunday, or literally walking around neighbourhoods looking for sale boards. Estate agents were almost exclusively local family firms who'd been operating for generations. The mortgage system would seem absolutely balmy to modern buyers. Building societies, not banks, were the primary lenders operating on a mutual basis. The Halifax, Abbey National, Woolwich and Leeds Permanent dominated the market. To get a mortgage, you typically needed to have been saving with them for at least 2 years, proving your financial reliability through regular deposits. They operated a rationing system where available funds were allocated to savers in order of priority. The standard lending calculation was rigid, 2.5 times the male earner's salary, or occasionally 2 times salary, plus 1 times a working wife's salary. Though many societies wouldn't count women's earnings at all, assuming they'd stop working to have children. A 10% deposit was the absolute minimum, but 25% was preferred and got you better rates. The Bank of England base rate in 1965 was 6%, with mortgages typically 1 to 2% above this. The legal process involved significant face-to-face interaction. Your solicitor, fees ranged from £40 to £100 depending on complexity, would handle everything manually. Searches were literally that, someone physically checking records at the local council. The land registry wasn't comprehensive. Many properties were still unregistered, relying on deeds going back centuries. Here's a detail that seems bizarre now. Imagine these savings. Surveying was optional and basic. A full structural survey might cost £25 and essentially confirm the roof was on and the walls were standing. Mortgage valuations were even more basic. often just confirming the property existed and wasn't grossly overpriced. Problems like subsidence, dry rot, or woodworm were considered normal wear and tear. The timeline from offer to completion averaged 8 to 12 weeks, though without chains this was often faster than today. Exchange and completion frequently happened simultaneously. None of this nail-biting gap between legally committing and actually moving. Gazumping was rare because it was considered deeply dishonourable. Estate agents who facilitated it would lose their reputation in the community. Now, let's delve into the expenses that nobody prepared you for in 1965. Removal costs ranged from £20 for a local move to £60 for something long distance, though many people simply hired a van for £5 and roped in relatives. The real shock came with setting up home where class aspirations met financial reality. Furnishing a 3-bedroom house properly required serious money. A G-plan dining suite, the ultimate status symbol, cost £180, nearly 2 months' average salary. The matching sideboard added another £85. But this furniture was built from solid teak or mahogany, with dovetail joints and craftsmanship that meant it would outlast several generations of owners. Today's equivalents in antique shops prove their durability. Carpeting was essential for respectability. Axminster or Wilton carpet cost £4 to £6 per square yard, and you needed about 60 square yards for an average house. That's £300 just for floor coverings, almost 10% of the house price. Most people compromised with cheaper options or did rooms gradually, living with bare boards or lino in between. What about the room where Sunday roasts were perfected? Kitchen modernisation was where dreams met reality. A fitted kitchen was revolutionary in 1965. Hygiena and English Rose were the big names. A full kitchen with Formica worktops, matching units, and a serving hatch, the must-have feature, cost £400 to £600. Appliances were bought separately: a Hoover twin-tub washing machine £70, an English electric refrigerator £55, and if you were really showing off, a Kenwood chef mixer at £25. Insurance was refreshingly straightforward. Buildings and contents combined cost about £18 to £25 annually through the Prudential or Pearl assurance. No comparison websites, no excess haggling, just a man in a suit who came to your house monthly to collect the premium. Life assurance to cover the mortgage was another £4 to £8 monthly, depending on age and health. Utilities tell an interesting story about modernisation. Many houses still needed updating. Installing central heating cost £300 to £500, considered an incredible luxury. A back boiler behind the fireplace with radiators was the dream setup. Getting a telephone installed cost £10 plus a £40 deposit, returned after a year, with quarterly rental of £12. The waiting list stretched to 6 months in some areas. Most families managed without, using the red phone box for emergencies. Here's where the mathematics become absolutely staggering. Those 1965 buyers have experienced wealth creation that defies normal investment logic. That £3,500 average house. In London or the South East, it's now worth £600,000 minimum, possibly millions in prime locations. Even accounting for inflation, this represents a real terms gain of nearly 1,000%. Let's examine specific examples that'll make your head spin. A 3-bedroom house in Hampstead that cost £7,000 in 1965 recently sold for £3.2 million. That's not a percentage gain. That's transformation from middle-class comfort to serious wealth. Even modest areas have seen spectacular returns. A terrace in Clapham bought for £4,000 is now worth £850,000. The compound effect becomes even more dramatic when you consider mortgage erosion. Someone with a £2,500 mortgage in 1965 watched inflation destroy its real value. By 1975, after the oil crisis inflation, that mortgage payment was worth perhaps 40% of its original value in real terms. By the 1980s, monthly payments that once required careful budgeting became less than a restaurant meal. Meanwhile, the asset value multiplied relentlessly. The really clever ones leveraged this accidentally. Those who bought additional properties as investments, perhaps a £1,500 terrace to rent out, created dynastic wealth without meaning to. A portfolio of 5 modest properties bought for £15,000 total in 1965 would be worth £1.5 to £2 million today, plus 6 decades of rental income that probably totaled another million. Council house sales under Right to Buy in the 1980s created a second wave. Tenants who'd lived in council houses since the 1960s could purchase at discounts up to 70%. A council house in inner London, nominal value £30,000 in 1985, bought for £9,000 with maximum discount, might be worth £700,000 today. That's social policy creating instant wealth transfer. The inheritance implications are reshaping British society. Someone dying today who bought modestly in 1965 likely leaves property worth £400,000 to £800,000. Their children receive more wealth than most people can save in a lifetime of work. This isn't earned wealth or entrepreneurial success. It's temporal accident, being born at the right time to the right parents. Understanding 1965's market reveals uncomfortable truths about today's housing crisis. The house price to income ratio has shifted from 3 to 1 to over 8 to 1 nationally, reaching 15 to 1 in London. This isn't a gradual drift, it's a fundamental restructuring of how housing works in British society. The quality comparison is particularly stark. Those 1965 houses were built with materials now considered premium: old-growth timber that's incredibly durable, proper lime plaster that breathes, Welsh slate roofs lasting centuries. Space standards from Parker Morris recommendations meant minimum room sizes that modern developers would consider generous. A 1960s council house often has larger rooms than a modern private development. The financial architecture has completely transformed. In 1965, local building societies made local lending decisions based on personal knowledge. Today, algorithmic lending by global banks treats houses as financial assets rather than homes. The human element, the bank manager who knew your family, has vanished, replaced by credit scores and automated decisions. Social changes have revolutionized housing dynamics. In 1965, most women didn't work after marriage, so single-income mortgages made sense. The shift to requiring 2 full-time incomes hasn't improved affordability, it's simply been absorbed into prices. We've created a trap where both partners must work continuously, with no flexibility for child-rearing, illness, or career changes. Geographic inequality has exploded beyond 1965's imagination. Then, London was perhaps 40% more expensive than provincial cities. Now the differential can be 300 to 400%. This isn't just about house prices, it's about opportunity concentration, creating a vortex effect where London sucks in talent and investment, further driving the divide. So what does this archaeological dig through 1965's property market teach us? Primarily that the period from 1965 to today represents a historical anomaly, not a normal market condition. The confluence of factors: wage inflation, financial deregulation, constrained supply, demographic bulges, and policy decisions created unrepeatable conditions for wealth accumulation through property. The generational divide this created isn't just about money, it's about fundamental life experiences. Those 1965 buyers experienced housing as affordable shelter that became valuable. Today's generation experiences housing as an impossibly expensive necessity that might never be attainable. This shapes everything from career choices to family formation to political beliefs. For today's market participants, the lessons are sobering. First, assuming property always rises is dangerous. The 1965 to 2025 boom required specific conditions that won't recur. Second, the social contract around housing has fundamentally broken. The promise that hard work equals home ownership no longer holds for most people. Third, without radical intervention, we're heading toward a neo-feudal system where property ownership determines life chances across generations. The mathematics are brutal but clear. For house prices to repeat their 1965 to 2025 performance over the next 60 years, the average home would need to cost £20 to £30 million. That's obviously impossible, which means future returns must be far lower, possibly negative in real terms. The game that worked for our parents and grandparents won't work for us or our children. Look, if you've made it this far, you're clearly as fascinated by this property paradox as I am. The truth about housing is often uncomfortable, sometimes shocking, but always important to understand. If this video has opened your eyes to the reality of British property, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because I've got plenty more myth-busting content coming your way. From the hidden history of council housing to the future of property technology, we're pulling back the curtain on British housing. Subscribe now, share this with anyone who needs to hear these truths, and remember, knowledge is power, especially in property. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your wallet protected.